Hello, welcome to the 2021 workshops at the International Conference of the System Dynamics Society. This workshop is called Building Applications or Flight Simulators with PowerSim Studio. PowerSim Studio is a System Dynamics enabled piece of software that allows you to build some pretty interesting things. I'm Len Malchinsky. Jake Jacobson may be helping me during the live sessions. We both work for Mind's Eye Computing, which is an authorized reseller of PowerSim Studio in North America. Okay. Hopefully you've downloaded either the Express version of Studio or the demonstration version of Studio, or you're actually an owner of PowerSim Studio. So if you've done that, please start Studio up. If not, pause the video and make sure to download and start. Okay, Studio comes from PowerSim AS, which is in Norway, in a small suburb just north of Bergen. The current version is version 10. The Studio name began in the year 2000. Prior to that, it was called PowerSim Constructor, and prior to that, starting in 1988, it was known as SimTech. There are several different versions. Basically, as you increase the version type and pay more, you get more features. Note that there's an academic version. Get my pointer going here. There's an academic version. There's a runtime engine. There's Express, which some of you may be using, which is completely free but limited model sizes and features. There's also a software development kit if you're going to do your own kinds of interfaces and web applications. And additionally, the 30-day version that I mentioned a few minutes ago. Jake and I, when we're doing this, we'll be using either Premium or Expert, depending on who's speaking at the moment. These four companies also provide solutions in moving your PowerSim Studio model to the web. PowerSim's got a lot of video resources. Okay, there are webinars and short videos on how to get started, how to do quite complex things with Studio. Go to their website and you can find that. There's also an independent PowerSim Tools user group that's managed at Groups.io. If you go there, you can ask to be invited. And then finally, Mind's Eye's got a website. At our resources page, we have approximately 90 free models that you can download and use at no cost. Many are quite well known. All the models from John Sterman's Business Dynamics, models from Hartmut Bosel's System Zoo, the Jim Hines Molecules of System Dynamics Modeling, and a few other things. So we're going to jump around and we'll talk about terminology, planning our interface, what's available, some examples, and then how to leverage some of the tools. What you should do now, again, assuming that you've got Studio loaded, you should load and or download first the Kaibab Plateau workshop model that's included on the link to this workshop. Make sure you've got that open in Studio. Okay, some technology and terminology. Okay, I believe in this kind of definition. There's a model, which is composed of modules. Whoops. PowerPoint's getting carried away here. It's composed of modules. If you assign an interface or build an interface to that, you get an application. So when I use a term like application, it's implied that you've built an interface, whether it's for you or your client or both. If all you have is a model with no particular user interface or flight simulator added to it, then it's not an application. Okay? These are the typical sources of data: exogenous data, the system dynamics, variables created to enable your interface, and then variables you might create for testing and debugging. And that last category are variables that you can remove from your model and it will continue to run well and correctly. And I'm just slowly bringing this in to say you have to make a conscious decision. What will you expose to your users? Let's go forward. Oh, when you're doing that planning, you might think of what are the inputs to this problem or this problem domain? Are there specific well-known policy levers? Do my stakeholders have control over these variables? What variables might be influenced by these policy levers? You might also look at it from a different direction. What outputs? What are the variables that decision makers would like to see printed in tables, on graphs, etc.? Are there any variables that might show the unintended consequences of policy decisions? How would you like these outputs to flow? Should they be available via menus, via flowcharts, lists, icons, whatever? And you might take a mixed approach. I'm trying to decide how to add an interface to my model. Which variables show the key consequences, the unintended consequences? Should I provide variables to allow my user to do what if, even if those things are not operationally feasible? And by that I mean, can they move a slider, for instance, that would change a value, but that's not possible either politically, financially, or operationally. But you still might want to include what if. So building an interface is not trivial. More important issues to consider. What about color? Does the organization you're working with have specific color schemes and logos? What about the layout and aspect ratio? Many years ago, you had to design an interface to fit a specific form factor, a specific computer's aspect ratio. Is this going to be a portrait approach or a landscape approach? What's the flow going to be? Are you going to organize the flow through the model where one of your clients follows a logical flow or logical paths? Or is it freeform? Are they going to be clicking anywhere they want and visiting any input and output screen they want at any point in time? Or some combination? Will you allow users to scroll windows? Or is all of your content going to be hyperlinked so that their eyes can only see one page of information at a time? To see more, they will have to click on a link. How much instruction, how much help, how many caveats will you have to put on that user interface? Do you need a screen that shows, for example, how to use the application? Do you need a screen of definitions and acronyms, much like a published research report would do? Do you need a screen indicating warnings? I've worked on many projects where we let the user know immediately that the model is an abstraction of reality, and therefore you can do things in the model that might be impossible or extremely difficult to do in the real world. Why do you permit that? because it enables learning. Here we go. Here are the tools that come with PowerSim Studio that you can use to build objects on your interface. There are things called frames, which are basically drawing objects. Excuse me. Free-form arrows, which are what's used to build causal loop diagrams. Action buttons. So an action button will perform an action on an interface. Hyperlinks will allow you to jump from screen content to screen content. Bookmarks are the places you're jumping to with the hyperlink. Then some things that are a little bit more traditional to all the software that does system dynamics. A time graph, a timetable, a chart, not available in all softwares, a scatter graph or X versus Y plot, a generic table not related to time, a gauge, a slider, and then a switch, which has a variety of interface features, including pick lists. Okay, here are some examples of what people have done. This is some work that the PowerSim Corporation had done for an oil company. And I tried to indicate several interface-like topics and then show them in the examples that we have coming up. So you see here, the folks at PowerSim AS implemented a vertical menu. Each of these words is a hyperlink to another screen, much like building a web application. Down here is a chart. Charts allow you to display data that comes from arrays. You can see an age distribution here for oil rigs. Switch. This is a switch that's a pick list. It allows you to select subsets of data to be displayed typically. Here's a time graph. How do I know? Because the x-axis is over time. Okay. These are hyperlinks, as I said earlier, and then that shouldn't say time graph. That's just the time, the current time of the simulation. Let me go forward. Now, that's a table that has one row and one column. Here's another one. This was done by PowerSim also for a hospital simulation. You can see I've got the same icons, and for some reason I had sliders and table come in to float in from the bottom, but it gives you an idea of what's going on here. So here I've got a table, here I've got a chart, here I've got a timetable, here I've got another timetable with a legend here showing multiple values on that timetable. Time graph, sorry. Here's another one. This one has to do with project management for ConocoPhillips, oil company again. Here's one for a gas pipeline. In particular, I like this one because it shows that you can embed graphics onto a diagram, and because of the nature of the interface tools, you can overlay the graphics with action buttons that are transparent. So someone could actually click on this portion of a frame, this would be a frame, and have it display a larger frame via an action button. Okay. Here's another one, telecommunications application, just to give you some ideas, some color, probably hyperlinks down here, action buttons here. This looks like it says roll of the year, probably advances the model forward, etc. Here's one on helicopter maintenance, and you should have these available, and you can print them if you like. Right? Let's face it, I personally am not an artist nor a graphic designer, so doing this takes some time and effort. Planning pays off, believe me. Planning pays off. Here's another kind of a horizontal menu where as I click on different tabs, this space will be occupied by different pieces of data. Okay. Here's one that I worked on, horizontal menu here. Got a couple of switches. Got some more switches here. A couple of sliders. There's a table. Here are some hyperlinks, hyperlinking to maps, hyperlinking to other interface screens. And this is another interface screen from that same project. I've got a stacked bar chart here. That's not built into Studio, but it's quite easy to accomplish. Some vertical sliders here, vertical sliders, another switch. This is an actual screenshot animation. Let's see if I can get it to run. There it goes. As the colors change, these power plants are going out of business, essentially ending their lifetime and being replaced. Either coal plants are being replaced or natural gas plants are being replaced. And the black is still the existing. And over the time span of this model, 66 power plants were retired. I believe this had a lot to do with moving from fossil fuels to renewable energy. Here's another interesting one, which is called a relative proportion slider. The folks I work with call it a Harris slider because it's named after the fellow who developed the code, and that code has actually been improved by Steinar Moen at PowerSim, so maybe it's soon to be called a Moen slider. Let's watch this one. I'm going to move other biofuels. As it increases, the others must decrease. Right? If I fix ethanol, that stays fixed at 50% and the other two move. Very useful with clients because not many people can give you exact numbers. They do know a lot about relative percents, and this slider is wonderful for that. So, I'm taking a pause here. Wait a minute. I'm using all these sophisticated tools. It turns out in Studio, the model canvas, the working area, can also do some pretty cool interface stuff. Watch this. We can implement what's called the Tufte sparkline. But let's take a look at this. Here's a chunk of a model. Actually, a model that we built in the introduction to Studio. Okay, I can turn on auto report on the model screen itself and have it be a graph or a number. So next to each variable, I can see over time what's happening. Okay, these two aren't that interesting because they're constants. But increasing population and population are both growing over time. I can also show the actual value of that variable at any point in time. If I do a single stepping through the model, which I could do with an action button, right, I would be able to see the value of every variable at every time step during the run. If I just hit run, of course I would see those values flash by very, very quickly. Okay. Here's a Tufte sparkline. I don't know how many of you know about Edward Tufte. Incredibly creative on the use of interfaces and graphics. I believe some of these ideas have been implemented in Microsoft Excel, but here I've got a table. I've got an arrayed variable with 4 regions, and I've got a number of saplings, young trees, and a number of mature trees. And I'm going to click here to start this animation going, I hope. There it goes. And you can see where the eastern region, that variable is a constant. In the other regions, it changes over time up to a certain point and then stays constant. This is not a part of the interface tool set in Studio, but it can be built using these guys, auto reports. Just wanted to show that. Okay, let's talk about color and imagery. We can put color obviously on the model diagram itself and on the flight simulator. On the flight simulator, we can change backgrounds. We can change the interface of, I think, every single interface object. Here are some examples. This is a problem that was proposed at MIT back in 1977 on illegal migration into the United States. The model was in Dynamo. I converted it into PowerSim Studio. I was able to exactly match the output. But one thing that the modeling team I worked with has done in the past is have a color coding scheme. This is a PowerSim Studio table that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rows and 2 columns. And when I see the color red, right, I realize that that's a variable having to do with something in the United States. If I see the color green, it has something to do with Mexico, right? If I see this crosshatch, that's a table function. Right? Just an example, not a necessity. Here's some others. And this one, I've got a stock where someone actually embedded the picture of a truck onto the icon that represents that stock or that level of trucks. Here, someone put a JPEG image on an auxiliary, and here a picture of a ship. It's a little hard to see on a constant. But the background of the screen is in blue instead of the typical white. Here's a model I did for the PowerSim Studio Olympics that was held back in 2016 by Moss Consulting. I was able to overlay this graphic. This is I wouldn't say classic because agent-based modeling isn't that old. Well, it depends how you look at it. To try to solve the so-called L-Farol bar problem using PowerSim Studio, and this was my submission. And in this particular stage of the competition, I won that submission. There's an actual picture of the L-Farol bar, which is actually in the state in the United States that I live in. And on top here is I've got a behavior over time graph. Actually a model run over time. Here's another award-winning model that was submitted for the System Dynamics Society Soy Hackathon, which occurred in the fall of 2020. So the main interface to that application was a flowchart, And as you clicked on these flowchart icons, at least the ones in green, they took you to various places in the model where you could learn about various things relating to soybean exports. Okay? The modeling environment itself, the model objects, all have different icon faces depending on what's in the variable. And I just wanted to point these out because if you're going to show a client pieces, parts of the model and not just interface elements, you might want to have a screen that tells them or gives them a legend of what these images mean. I just wanted to highlight here too that PowerSim Studio can do continuous and discrete modeling, either separately or together. Okay, so Kaibab Plateau, that's our sample model. I'm going to go to another screen here and open that up and get it ready. All right, this came from George Richardson's series of articles in the System Dynamics Review, and it's a constrained growth model basically where the constraints, deer are constrained by food, at least on the growth end, and they're constrained by predators on the end of life end. Food is obviously constrained by consumption due to deer, and maximum surface area has an effect, or the surface area has an effect on how much food can actually be grown. And then predators are controlled by the food sources they have, which are deer and so-called harvesting or hunting. So I'm going to end the PowerPoint here, and if I can, it's not letting me, having a little bit of trouble here. Here we go. I'm going to end that slideshow, and now I'm going to bring down the model here onto the recorded screen. Again, hopefully you've downloaded this, you've got Studio running. I'm just going to get it to fit this new screen. Don't forget, you can pause this video, go do all those things, and come back. What do we see here? If you have any familiarity with system dynamics, I'm sure you can tell what the stocks are, and I'm sure you can tell what the flows are. Studio distinguishes between auxiliaries, or some people call them converters, and constants. They do that primarily because you can slide a constant. You can't slide an auxiliary. You can use a slider to show an auxiliary, but you can't slide it. Also notice here, you'll see some differences in typeface on the icon. I'm going to zoom in to about 200%, and I'm going to move around a little bit here. I do that by clicking down my mouse wheel and then moving it. Notice this icon face, which is different from this one. This is Studio indicating that there's a table or graph or lookup function in that variable. I saw one other, I thought I saw one other kind of icon. No, I guess I didn't. Let me get it to fit again. Ah, yes, I did. That's this one. And now I'll zoom out again. Notice that this constant has a double wall around it, and that's the way that Studio indicates that there is an arrayed set of data. What I'm doing here now is I'm holding my control key and scrolling my mouse to increase the font size. To to show that that's input into this alternative harvest fraction, which is a lookup table. Okay, let's zoom back out. Let's try to do something. You know, what I think I'm going to do, I want to see what happens to deer over time. I'm going to come here and grab a time graph, click it, draw it, drop it, click and drop it, I'm done. Now I run the model and I see what happens to deer over time. That's simple. I'm going to double click the edge. In this particular case, I'm going to go to the value axes and I'm going to make the minimum be 0 deer. Excuse me, and go back and just take a look at the picture now. I typically like to have a 0 point on my vertical axes. Okay? Gosh, what if I want to put predators on there? But they have a different unit. No, that's okay. I'll draw predators on there. And now I've got deer and predators. And I can be really silly and drop food on there. The problem here is that the magnitudes of these variables are quite different. So that would not be a good idea. I'll just find the undo button and undo that one and undo predators. And I'm back to where I was. So I just created a time graph. Now I'm interested in how do deer and predators react. I'm going to grab a scatter graph, excuse me, draw it. I'd like to see how deer is related to predators. I'm going to put predators on the x-axis and deer on the y-axis. And since the model's already been run, it shows me automatically what happened. I could reset the model here with my run buttons. And I could single step it out. I have a very, very small time step. And it looks like it's every 3 days or something like that. So if I'm really fast, no, I'm not faster than the computer. I couldn't pause it in the middle of the run. You can ask your interface to pause it though. Okay, so there's an XY graph. Let's put a slider on something. How about on initial deer? I'll come up here, grab the slider, stretch it out, get initial deer, and throw it on. All right. Studio by default tries to estimate the ranges on that element. And notice it goes from 4,000, which is my current setting, in the middle, and then it goes from 3,999 to 4,001. That's not too exciting. I'm going to open this up. I'm going to go to the scale, and I'm going to say, you know, I want this thing to go from 3,000 deer to 5,000 deer. And now, when I put a slider on the screen, it will automatically fit that scale. So let's see what happens. I'll reset the model. I'll bring my deer all the way down to 3,000 and run the model. I still get overshoot and collapse. Oh well. I guess I really don't understand this system. All right. What if I wanted to make a chart? For example, here I've got some code, right? That's not connected to anything. What I'd like to do here is allow my user to draw the lookup or the graph relationship on their own. So I'll grab a chart icon, drop it on, drop the harvest fraction on there. Okay, what's going to be coming in to this alternative harvest fraction? What's my input going to be? Time. Here, sorry. So time is my input. My starting point is the year 1900, first month, first day, at 5-year increments, right? And then I want to use this data set as my lookup. And my user now could grab this, reset the model, of course, and they could draw whatever that harvest fraction. So back in 1900, gosh, every 5 years, I'm not really harvesting any predators, and then I might want to increase it till about 40% of predators are harvested. Okay. And what I've done then on this is I put some time graphs, scatter graph, sliders that chart, and then it's up to you to take those all and put them all together. How do you do that? Well, a couple of ways. You can grab the edge and drag it on to the other tab. And now I've moved it from time graphs into the all together now graph or tab. I'll undo that and do it another way. I've got it selected. Control C for copy. Control V for paste. And you can put all your objects on one interface screen and make it look pretty. Okay? So I'm going to take this off. Whoops. Go back to my PowerPoint. Start that slideshow up again. And here we go. So I just showed you a few things that can be done, right? We're going to try time graphs, scatter graph, sliders, and charts. And since this is recorded, you're welcome, right? Take your time, do it. You can do bookmarks. You can do hyperlinks. You can do action buttons. And you can do events. So bookmarks. Bookmarks are literally pieces of a screen that you'd like to zoom to or jump to or both after having clicked a hyperlink. Each bookmark has an unambiguous unique name. Bookmarks have these behaviors here. Let me get my pointer back. The bookmark can have the extent. That means they will fill the screen. They will zoom to fit, and the bookmark will be centered on the screen. Okay, the symbol characteristics of the bookmark are specific size kinds of details. Hyperlinks, just like a web page. It just allows navigation from bookmark to bookmark. Hyperlinks are actually action buttons, but the action is called hyperlink. Okay? And you can change the appearance of hyperlinks. They can be text. They can be one of these symbols here. Right? I can't remember if you can change the color. Oh, yes. Unbelievably, you can change the line style, the fill style, the font, the alignment, how you want the materials, the words, text, etc. aligned. Action buttons. Wow. I can do a lot of things with action buttons besides hyperlinks. I can have a message pop up. I can obviously open a hyperlink. I can click an action to set a value, to copy a value, to execute a PowerSim Studio command, to check a condition, to create an Excel file, save an Excel file, write to an Excel file, dimension the size of an Excel workbook, activate it, delete it, manage array ranges. And there are two that wouldn't fit here. I can have it pop up a dialog box, and I can have it set a placeholder value. A placeholder is the name of an Excel file that you can use for an input into your model. And basically what this is saying is any model can have multiple placeholders. So if the Excel file input data represents different scenarios, you can, in one model, load many different scenarios, one at a time. That's what placeholders do. Okay. There are also events. So a place that I used to work has a quite famous model. When you exceed the capacity of a water reservoir, obviously the model is an abstraction, so the reservoir doesn't spill, but an event pops up and says, oh my gosh, water has spilled over the top of the reservoir based on the policy levers that you manipulated. Okay, so there's a way to add events, and events have properties. They can play when the condition is true. They can prevent the model from running when the condition is true. They can allow you to change a value and then continue running the model. The combinations start to get hard to manage in your head. There are so many things it can do. That's it. You need to play with this. You need to go online to the PowerSim Studio site and look at the cool webinars that are provided there. Go to the user group and see some of the interface things people have done. And of course, here are the final details on where you can get models that actually run with units and add interfaces yourself to get practice at Mind's Eye Computing. And of course, if you'd like to get the software, that's at powersim.com. And then unfortunately, this little S should be up here. There's an independent user group that you should definitely visit, especially if you're a current studio user. There's so much free information there. It's completely free to join. It's independent of the PowerSim company. That's it. Thank you very much. I hope maybe I'll see some of you in the live session.